And I think there's one thing we have to remember about food, is we could all survive without the modern technology. None of us would survive too long without food. And therefore, food is important to all humans, no matter where they live. And Ireland is a huge net exporter of food. I think the second thing is that the downturn has increased our awareness of the potential of our own resource-based industries. And it's important to realise how important food and beverages are to our economy. Now, I'm going to purposely approach this from what I would call the market point of view, as opposed to the health safety point of view, because there are a lot of speakers who know a lot more about food safety from the safety point of view than I do. But I think one of the things we have to get across to those involved in the food industry is that high standards is good marketing. And I would suggest that events of the last 20 years point out to us all of the time how vulnerable we are to food scares and to health issues arising, or health threats arising from the food we produce. I had the great misfortune to arrive in the Department of Agriculture as Minister of State the very week that foot and mouth was detected in Britain. And if you look at that particular episode, if you look at the dioxin in the pig meat, if you look at the horse meat scandal, they were not basically caused by farmers, but by processors. In two of them was the processes of the feedstuffs that was fed to the animals that caused the problem. And in one case, it was the processors, the horse meat, of the final product that contaminated the final product. And therefore, when we're talking about food being safe, we're not just talking about the production of animals or the production of vegetables or fruit or any other crop. We're very much talking about keeping our eye also on food input standards at all times. I think it's fair to say that probably within the last 20, 30 years, the greatest challenge at the farm level was the use of illegal growth promoters. And I think it's fair to say that it was the aggressive, intensive farmers who were more likely to go down that road than the less intensive farmers. So I think it's important that when we look at food, as has been said before, that not only do we concentrate on inspection of farmers, and that can be fairly intense, but we also have to have the whole chain right down to the final product that you eat. We need that to maintain the highest standards. Now, the other thing that becomes obvious about food scares is this, that if we look at it from a marketing point of view, in many food scares, the chance of you actually getting any ill effects from the particular scare involved, in other words, if you take the bacon scare, the pig meat scare, you'd want to have eaten an awful lot of rashers or sausages before the level of dioxin, if you spread it across the whole food chain, was going to affect you. Your chances of getting killed from BSE was much less than walking across the road. But the reality is that it had a huge market effect. So, when you're talking to farmers, talking to producers, talking to manufacturers, there are very good market arguments in favour of maintaining the highest standards. When I was in the Department of Agriculture, I used to be fascinated at the figures we had at the time for the drop in beef consumption over BSE. And I think it was something like 30% in Germany, and it was virtually 0% in this country. And the logic of it, as far as I could see it, was that in the more industrialized countries where people weren't as familiar with cows and animals and production systems and so on, they were much more afraid of the food production system I think here in Ireland, most people inherently believe that the beef in the shop, which came from Ireland from heifer beef here, was very unlikely to do them any damage. They might have stayed away a little bit from the burgers and the processed foods, but they certainly didn't move away from ordinary beef. And therefore, when we look at that, and when we look at the risk to human health versus the drop in sales, and when you take, for example, that at the moment 90% of our beef is sold somewhere in the European Union, you see how important it is for us to take a really, really tough view when a food scare arises. And as you know, I think it's fair to say that when the initial BSE scare, they decided to foot and mouth, BSE, the pig meat, and then more recently the horse meat. I think we have been perfectly right in this country to, if anything, overreact. Even if you know scientifically the risk is low. Forget about arguing about it. Just clear the shelves, make it absolutely certain that not only are you not causing any threat, but you're not perceived to cause any threat, because the damage to our industry of a perceived threat to health far outweighs any action you take in the short term, no matter how drastic it is. I think we have decisions to make about the structure of Irish farming going forward and where the best marketing position is. Because food is sold by reputation and image. Let's be honest about it. Nobody goes along to the FSAI in every case and says, will you give me the statistical risk of eating a particular type of food? People buy food, and we all know this from marketing and so on, by reputation and image. And image is absolutely vital. And we as a country are all the time on about our green island. We're all the time on. I always was amused when I used to go abroad, like, how do we sell things in this country? We sell them by pictures of green fields with beautiful hills in the background. We sell them normally by using Irish music and a bit of Irish culture thrown in. And all the time we're trying to conjure up a nice image of a green island, non-intensive agriculture. It's interesting, I have never seen Borbia go on the continental markets with a feedlot as the big picture on the front with thousands of cattle, you know, feeding in troughs. Have you ever seen it? No. It's always a green field. And I think it is important that the image and the reality match each other. It's very, very important that we don't pretend to do one thing and then create a farming that's far removed from it. Because I certainly will be honest here, I don't know much about battery chickens from some certain countries far away from here, but I wouldn't be particularly keen on eating them. Now maybe I have no logical basis, and maybe the FSAI will say it's actually safer than eating beef or something. But I think we all make choices in a rather simple fashion. And in terms of marketing, I think we have to be aware that if somebody was, for example, to write an article in 20 years' time to say, you know, those lovely green fields and whatever, that's not how they really do it, I think we'd be doing ourselves huge damage. And therefore, my view is if we want a premium price, then we must produce a premium product the way the consumer wants it and the way we sell it image-wise to the consumer. It's also interesting when we look at what happened in the horse meat scandal in consumer habits. A survey showed that people did not change the amount of money they spent on meat, but they did move away from the cheaper cuts and they started buying dearer meat in less quantities. So even if consumer spend is not increasing, consumer choice can change if you can persuade the market to go for the premium product. I believe organic production is important and should be promoted. But I do not foresee it becoming majority production in this country. And I believe that we need a certification and an international certification of non-intensive production. In other words, something between intensive feedlot farming and the kind of production that predominates here in Ireland. And I believe that we have to press that there is a certification for that type of production that's not pure organic, but on the other hand is based, for example, as we have mainly, I'm not saying exclusively, but mainly on grass-based production, and that done in a non-intensive way to the highest standards. Because I believe, again, if we could get this certification, and I believe very much in certification, you get that certification, then you're putting yourself in a clear place in the market and you're differentiating your product from people who are, for example, third country imports and so on that have an effect. Can I also say, in relation to CAP reform, CAP reform is about food production, but it's not simply about food production. It is about public goods. It is about Europe's wish not to go down the American method of production. It is about saying there are issues here beyond the market, and we want to retain the family structure of Irish farming and of European farming right across Europe, not only for the rural communities, but also because it gives you a certain type of product at a certain type of premium that is important to the society in which we live. There was a comment made, and I accept it was made in good faith, but I think it's a little propaganda, that I was very keen in moving money east to west in CAP reform. I wasn't. I was very keen in moving money down the sector because the money was disproportionately concentrated at the top. 70% of farmers get less than 10,000 of a single farm payment. And the 70% of those farmers do not live in the west of Ireland. 50% of the farmers on the east coast get less than 10,000 of a single farm payment. In fact, I checked out Wexford, it's 48%, and it's the county with the highest farm payment. And therefore, what I wanted was to retain the small and medium-sized farmers, whether they're on the best land or on poor land, in farming, because I believe the structure of Irish farming should not be destroyed overnight. It is worth noting that 2% of farmers get over 50,000 per annum in a fixed payment before they start farming, and they're getting 12% of the payments. And that is true right throughout Ireland. Every county has farmers, including Leitrim, Mayo, Donegal and so on, have farmers getting over 50,000. My belief is if you're giving public money, you have to look at what you want to do with the public money. And my view of the public money, it is to give a basic floor level to people, and then those with the biggest production after that should make it on the market. But as I said, it's not a West Coast policy, it's a policy of redistribution within every county in Ireland. Just want to say a word about artisan foods. When I went into the Department of Agriculture as Minister of Rural Development, I got very, very involved with the then Director of FSAI and with the artisan food sector. And there was a lot of complaints at the time about regulation. And I came to the conclusion that regulation has up all of these things, whereas to a certain extent they're a barrier. They were also the access to the market. And I believe that Teagasc and the state agency should have a role in facilitating small entrepreneurs comply with the highest standards, rather than knocking down those standards. I also had ideas of how we could have a cheap way in rural areas of facilitating people with purpose-built buildings for high-quality food production. Now, I would make one exception. I believe in the local selling of vegetables, meat, potatoes, eggs, where you're selling them on a very local market, where people can identify the producer, that we need a pragmatic approach, and that people are genuinely and certifiably selling things they produce locally and allowing that they, I don't know if anybody here to remember Dinny and Miley getting the eggs in the shop and rubbing the dirt on them and trying to sell them off as home eggs, but allowing there's no Dinnies or Mileys here. I believe it is important that we'd have some system of allowing local sale, and therefore you take your risk because you know where you're getting it. finally, just want to say that over the last 6 months, we've been doing a lot of work in the Oireachtas Committee in relation to the share of the money. Who's getting what out of the finished product in the shop? We'll be looking at meat, liquid milk and so on. And in the end of the day, what we see is right across the world, the primary producer, whether it's coffee or whether it's beef, whether it's milk, and the figures on liquid milk are quite startling. Price of milk, liquid milk, the farmer's take has gone down from 43% to 32% since 1995. So when you're buying a litre of milk, effectively the farmer's getting 11 cents less per litre now than they were compared to 1995. And this constant pressure on the primary producer is not sustainable, not only in Ireland, not only in the European Union, but throughout the world. But if we want farmers to maintain the highest standards, then we must make sure that they're not pushed to extremes to try make a living out of farming. And therefore, I believe that our motto should not be cheap food. Our motto should be food good to eat at a fair price and a fair return to the primary producer. Good morning.